Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining our webinar today. We know brands and marketers have so many questions around the cost of living crisis, and the news doesn't always help. According to some sources, we're going into a recession. According to others, we're probably not, or maybe some countries are. Meanwhile, inflation is high, but it's falling, and the job market is strong, but we're seeing layoffs in many sectors. I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this constant back and forth. We know it's an incredibly confusing time for businesses, and we're going to spend this webinar trying to make sense of it. I'm Shauna, a senior analyst in the trends team, and I'm joined by my colleague, Matt.
Hey everyone, I'm a trends manager at our London office, and before we kick off, I'm just going to give you a short introduction to GWI. So for anyone who doesn't know us, we're an audience insights company. Our SaaS platform and custom data products are trusted by the world's biggest brands, media organizations, and agencies to gain a deep understanding of their audiences at speed. We've got the world's biggest panel of respondents, representing over 2.7 billion internet users in 50 markets. We make this data available through our intuitive subscription-based platform, which allows teams to dive in and cross-analyze different data points and audiences to help them better understand consumers' behaviors, attitudes, social media habits, their purchase journey, and so much more. So this webinar will use a mixture of data from GWI Core, our main flagship survey, GWI USA, which offers a deep dive into the lives of 240 million American internet users across all 50 states, GWI Work, our B2B dataset, which profiles professionals in 18 markets, and finally GWI Zeitgeist, which is fielded monthly and gives us the flexibility to ask questions about the things that matter right now.
Nice. And the question we need to answer before diving into the data is, why does this research matter? Well, not only is the economy sending mixed signals, these metrics don't allow us to understand or predict consumer behavior. For that, we need to study psychology. Even if financial institutions are putting a more positive spin on things, we can't assume that people will suddenly start loosening their purse strings, as most of us don't base our spending on how the stock market or GDP is doing. And even if these metrics influence some people's outlook on the economy, this by itself doesn't allow us to make accurate predictions, as consumer behavior isn't rational. 1 in 4 of those who expect their personal finances to get worse in the next 6 months say they'd rather sacrifice spending to buy a product sooner than save up and wait to buy it. So it's not like everyone pulls the plug on spending as soon as they start to sweat about money.
Yeah, it's so easy to get bogged down in the debate about whether or not we'll see a recession. It's actually a question of whether it will feel like one to shoppers and whether this will stop them from spending. And your stat reminds us that we all respond to uncertainty differently and not always in the most rational way. The economy is obviously confusing and no one really knows where it's headed, but we're going to show how the current situation looks from a human standpoint and suggest how brands can prepare for the months ahead. So if we want to understand people's current moods and buying behaviors, we have to go back a few years. The stage for what's happening now was set back in 2020, so this is where we're going to start our analysis. So the 2020 recession was the deepest and shortest on record. By the time some people heard word of a recession, we were already out of it. And because it was created by the pandemic, it's even been described as a fake recession. And we can have a look at our data and see how this translates. In the early months of 2020, they were economically speaking a short-lived shock to the system, with the number of people expecting their personal finances to get better falling off a cliff in Q2 2020. And this makes sense. Many were temporarily or permanently laid off all of a sudden, as whole sectors closed shop overnight. But after that initial shock wore off, consumer confidence climbed back up fairly quickly.
Yeah, it has started to creep down again, but it's unlikely we'll ever see a drop as sharp or steep as in 2020 again. Financial crises often catch economists off guard, like in 2007. But the possibility of one in 2023 has been spoken about for a while now, and we've had a lot of time to mentally prepare. Forbes Council member Austin Speck even suggests that consumers have adapted to the inflationary environment, and there could be some truth to that. Something we know from our data is that people in countries like Argentina, with a long history of high inflation, are less likely to say they're price conscious than those in countries like Japan, which has seen low inflation rates since the 90s. So, if people believe the cost of living crisis is going to be shallow and ongoing, there's a chance their reactions to it will be slow and long drawn out as well. Another key difference to past downturns are the restrictions that went on. People were unable to go out and spend on out of home activities for some time, and various countries offered financial aid to consumers. As a result, many actually found themselves with more savings than they had pre-COVID. In October 2022, over half of consumers said their savings would cover them for at least 4 months were they to lose their main source of income. And 3 months is what's generally recommended. On the whole, many people were in a good place financially at the end of last year. So it's likely that the number who put off buying non-essentials wasn't as high as in past economic crises, which helps explain why spending over the holiday season and during events like Black Friday was surprisingly high. What did get put off were trips and flights. According to our data, vacations abroad have become more frequent over the last decade and a half. And after getting used to exotic getaways and then having to hit the pause button, many of us clung to ideas of where we were going to travel when the pandemic became less of an issue, which is a sentiment we're going to see throughout this webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Shauna. These are all great points, and I think this sense of urgency or adventure explains why many people aren't ready to hit the spending brakes. But soon, a fair few may not even have the choice, and we do have to keep in mind what will happen when or if people's savings run out. Moving on now, we're going to have a look at what's going on in people's heads and what their plans are for the future. Our research shows that trust in big brands and loyalty towards them has gone down. Trust is more important to consumers, but it's harder than ever to earn right now. So it's incredibly important for companies to be able to read the room in 2023, and that starts with knowing the thoughts and desires of their audience. So from a distance, consumers' economic outlet doesn't look too bad. People are most likely to say that inflation's had a moderate impact on their bank balance, and far more think that their finances will get better in the next 6 months than worse. But country breakdowns count for a lot, and the vibe's obviously going to be a bit different depending on where in the world you live. Towards the end of 2022, we asked consumers in 12 markets questions around the cost of living, and we were surprised that the percentage saying that half or more of their paycheck went on bills and expenses was in fact the exact same as it was the year before. But of course, when we looked into it more, we found that the situation was really different in certain places, with the UK, Germany, and France seeing the biggest drops in disposable income. And the same is true when we look at a global level. Across 47 markets, the number who are optimistic about their finances hasn't dropped much overall, but it's really plummeted in parts of Europe. So brands need to take regular temperature checks, especially those operating in international markets.
For sure. And again, economic indicators only go so far in explaining the mood of each country. Here in the UK, train drivers, healthcare workers, and teachers are all on strike. And it's just been the craziest time in British politics. So it's not just inflation creating an atmosphere of uncertainty. By the same token, the ripple effects of the Ukraine conflict aren't evenly spread, with nearby countries being most affected. As well as being heavily reliant on Russian gas, the refugee crisis and fears of invasion are more intense in these parts, which will factor into how people are thinking and spending too. So even though certain markets are going to see more noticeable changes than others, some trends do hold up across regions. Here's a key one. Consumers are torn. They're confused and reluctant to put their lives on hold again, but also starting to think along more cautious lines. And we see this tension throughout our research. The two fastest growing New Year's resolutions are traveling more and saving money, which is a tricky balancing act. American saving plans also seem inconsistent at times. Interest in buying options, stocks, shares, and funds is shrinking. And more hope to open savings accounts and buy bonds, which are often seen as a safe investment. But as people opt for less risky investments, we've also seen a rise in Americans saying they only save up when they have a specific need. Chances are, if you're concerned about inflation outpacing your savings rates, you might be more inclined to spend on smaller purchases. In 1980s Brazil, for example, hours-long lines at stores would form at the start of the month, as shoppers looked to spend their money before prices rose even more.
Yeah, we actually have an insight that backs that up pretty nicely. Those who say that inflation's had a dramatic impact on their lives are actually more likely to plan on increasing the amount that they spend on non-essentials in 2023. And I think the main thing to take away from all of this is that demand for budgeting, help, and memorable experiences is high, and consumers will appreciate brands that showcase ways to enjoy life in a more modest fashion. And speaking of which, we're going to have a look at the changes in people's goals and aspirations and the link this has to personal aesthetics. Times are generally harder, but some consumers are in a better financial position than they were pre-COVID, and many will keep spending. But a key point is that they're often less keen to show that they're doing it. People carried on buying luxury goods during the Great Recession, though noticeable logos became less attractive. Not only that, food trucks and bare brick walls became trendy. And there's a similar mood catching on in the US right now as goals become a bit more humble. As you can see by the chart on screen, staying fit, fashion choices, and doing well at work have all become less important to Americans. People don't have as much headspace to deal with environmental and social justice issues and have grown tired of showy PR pushes.
Yeah, and the news and social media users have picked up on this. Celebrities at red carpet events like the Golden Globes seem to have been choosing to ditch the bling in favor of bare skin. As a result, the phrase "no necklace" trend racked up millions of views on TikTok in February, as did the term recession core, a minimalist wardrobe driven by current crises. This is partly due to a desire to refocus on the basics and give up the time and effort-intensive shopping sessions needed to keep up with trends. But it also represents a move toward more traditional, reliable materials that stand the test of time. Keeping track of these changes is key, and another part of preparing for a downturn is identifying new sources of demand. And we do have to spotlight younger groups when we're doing this. They're much more optimistic about their finances and the economy, and more eager to spend on non-essentials. In case you hadn't heard, reports of Zillennials, that's those on the cusp between Gen Z and millennials, splashing out on luxuries have started sprouting up, and our research generally backs them up. The number of US 16 to 24s saying they buy designer brands every 2 to 3 months is up 13% in a single wave. While Gen Z have less spending power than older groups, they found a way to prop up their disposable income, living on at home, often rent-free. And this might also mean they're less dependent on their savings and whether or not they run out.
And it's not just about them buying more non-essentials than in the past. They're only going to become more relevant to companies in the future as they start to represent a greater share of consumers overall, which is why they should form a key part of businesses' long-term brand building strategies. Many brands are already basing decisions on them. Nike CEO John Donohue recently said that the company is focused on Gen Z in China, and other sneaker brands like JD Sports and Anta are also targeting this generation. They're just really worth keeping in mind, especially if you're a luxury, clothing, or entertainment company. So again, it's super beneficial to keep tabs on how the market has changed in order to adapt your offering and meet new demand. But things can change very quickly, so it's also worth thinking ahead, considering what people would be most likely to change going forward, and also thinking about their goals, as this highlights gaps that new products, when marketed well, can fill. So the number aiming to cook more is high, but it's up to food companies to sell it to us. While meal kit delivery industry has already started to show signs of a struggle as more turn towards DoorDash, air fryers, and ready meals, engagement with HelloFresh has actually risen in that data. The brand has a clear mission to provide home-cooked meals without any planning, and it uses influencers to show how convenient that can be. Plus, food brands can tap into the air fryer trend by offering recipes that center around it. Nestle has actually said the company's leaning into the air fryer boom through its frozen food brands, specifically to offer companies more value. At the same time, the leisure sector can get more people outdoors by offering a wider range of price points. Virgin Experience Days often send round bucket list on a budget tips, for example, spotlighting their low-cost activities.
Yeah, and few industries have more to gain than fintech. Among these cost-saving ideas, setting a budget has been the biggest riser since 2022. Revolut's Savings Vault, which allows customers to set aside money pots, has seen a huge jump in usage, largely because these tools are marketed so well. And we got smart tech for people who want to be more energy efficient, and the secondhand market for the 1 in 5 looking to either buy or sell things from other people. All such great opportunities, which can be seized by brands who tell compelling stories. The last thing we're going to cover in this section are people's attitudes to work, which ties back to the minimalist trend we just mentioned. Based on our data from past financial crises, we know they have a big impact on how people approach their job. And it's important for employers to be aware of changing attitudes and cater to them. Rising inflation is unfortunately making the mental health crisis worse. Year on year, there's been a jump in Americans saying they visit a counselor or psychologist regularly. And this is all worse among those who are feeling inflation's impact most heavily. Across 2020 and 2021, we saw a shift towards more self-focus as people started putting their welfare front and center. And a work less, live more attitude seems to have caught on. There's a growing list of role models, most recently Jacinda Ardern, admitting they don't have enough fuel in the tank to go on. And the recent spring of tech layoffs are also weighing on people's minds.
Yeah, and all of this reminds people that their job status can change in a minute, which is another reason not to sacrifice personal life for work. And going forward, employers that empower and support their workers stand a better chance of keeping top talent. For example, professionals at companies with broad flexibility in hours, mental health support, and medical cover are more likely to be satisfied with their job. It's also worth remembering that each industry has had a different experience over the past few years, and so the level of support and benefits workers are chasing will vary a lot. In the Great Recession, construction and manufacturing were the hardest hit, while the COVID collapse was a nightmare for leisure, healthcare, and hospitality. And these are among the sectors where professionals are most likely to say that they feel overworked. So now that we've had a little look at how people's attitudes have changed, the next questions we're going to answer are, how is this translating into their purchase behavior, and what are they prioritizing in their spending? The first big headline here is that people are going all out on experiences. After all the disruption over the last few years and all that pent-up demand, they're not going to let a little economic uncertainty get in the way of traveling abroad and going to gigs. Things are generally looking a lot brighter for the travel, leisure, and hospitality sector. Festivals like Tomorrowland keep selling out in minutes, and Airbnb recently recorded its first full year of profitability, which points to the global travel rebound. China's recent lifting of travel restrictions means that we're expecting to see a lot of travel growth in the APAC region too.
Yeah, it's almost like the situation has reversed in a way. During lockdowns, we couldn't spend on out-of-home experiences, so we spent more on making our homes comfortable. Whereas now, home and tech upgrades are much less of a priority. We've seen companies like Peloton struggling in the post-pandemic landscape, and this can be put down to a number of things. The simple answer is that we're outside doing things much more than we were in 2020, but it's also the fact that these are practical purchases, unlike travel tickets or holiday packages, which make us feel good. It's really the emotional connection that keeps consumers hooked. And this is something brands should emphasize in their campaigns.
Yeah, and even though people are no longer buying exercise bikes, they're definitely treating themselves to ice cream. In the world of smaller purchases, people are spending more on affordable treats or little luxuries like premixed cocktails or fragrances, and this is a pattern that economists have called the lipstick effect. We've definitely seen this kind of behavior before. Back in 2008, luxury lingerie sales soared, and in the 2001 recession, people bought lipsticks in droves. This doesn't mean that people aren't looking for good deals. They're just, again, cutting back on some things in order to prioritize others. Our Core Plus research shows that Europeans are increasingly turning to own label products for everyday shopping, but a handful of brands are thriving, and we've shown some of the companies benefiting in the UK market on screen. Consumers here might think twice about spending on Nescafe coffee beans, for example, but then they might still spring for a Starbucks on a stressful afternoon.
Yeah, and you can see these patterns in a lot of markets, with brands at extreme ends of the price scale doing well. And it's all because hard times make consumers want to both save and treat themselves. So that's a snapshot of where we're at with spending, but what would be the first to go if money got tighter? Well, a relatively small number say they'd be keen to cut back on but beauty and personal care. Instead, they're much more likely to trim the budget for bigger luxuries and nights out. Right now, many of us can afford to take weekend breaks, eat out, and go abroad. But if our savings run out, we might have to start picking and choosing. Ultimately, if push comes to shove, we'd be most willing to cut back on our social outings. Still, the leisure and tourism industries can raise their chances of success by following in the footsteps of travel. Vacations are a big purchase, but there are several everyday items that people would sooner slash from their budgets, like car fuel, clothing, or alcohol. For a lot of people, especially as we navigate crisis after crisis, vacations offer relief from life's everyday stresses. And various travel ads get this across really well.
Cool. Thanks, Shauna. So building on what you just spoke about there, we're going to delve deeper into how brands can add value in times of uncertainty and how this can vary by sector. In a downturn, it's really easy for brands to get obsessed with pricing, but generally speaking, more people say that quality is most important to them than cost. The quality of products has also become more influential over time. Pre-pandemic, Western consumers were most likely to say that rewards like discounts or free gifts would drive them to promote a brand online. Now, it's high quality that ranks on top. Of course, we're not suggesting that price isn't important. In certain industries, affordability needs to be pushed to the forefront. As Ogilvy's vice chairman, Rory Sutherland, pointed out, businesses can believe different things and both can be right. Compared to other Europeans, those flying with Vueling in the next 12 months are 18% more likely to say that they're motivated by discounts. But when it comes to luxury brands, it's not always the best game plan to cut prices, as this can lower the aspirational power of a good or service. Sometimes a high price can create a perception of better quality in consumers' minds, and buyers have already looked to set an expectation on how much they're willing to spend. Travelers looking to spend extra on pampering this year, for example, are 37% more likely to say they look for the top of the range options than average, and a discount might make that purchase feel a little less indulgent.
For sure. And other deciding factors like if I trust the brand, good reputation, and positive customer reviews also remind us that it really doesn't have to be a race to the bottom to stay competitive. As we hinted at above, each brand, industry, and product category will have its own trends. And in this section, we spotlighted some basic utilities and essentials to show what we mean and highlight how consumers' priorities are changing in these areas. For household products, price and special offers have more pull than they did this time last year. The power of brand name has dipped, which is a trend we often see during downturns, where loyalty is tested and consumers start exploring cheaper alternatives. Still, even if brands can't lower prices, they can create value by emphasizing qualities like product size, which make shoppers feel like they're getting the most cost-effective option. Medicine's a very different ballgame, being one of the areas where brand name has gained influence. The list of health problems people are experiencing is growing across our research, and consumers might feel like generic drugs carry more risk. And leading on from this, something that shines through many of these examples is the sway of recommendations, which highlights the power of trust and reliability in uncertain times. Finally, we're going to have a little look at energy suppliers. This is an area where inflation is having the biggest impact on budgets, especially in Europe, so it's no surprise to see price gaining influence. That being said, the ability to track usage is the top climber, a clear sign that we really value a sense of control over the money we're spending. So again, there are other ways for brands to differentiate themselves beyond price. It's also interesting to see that environmental credentials have taken a big nosedive in terms of consumer priorities. While they care about the environment, it can seem like a bit of a luxury problem when money runs dry. This doesn't mean it shouldn't be a brand priority, just that companies might want to reevaluate how much focus they put on it in their communications.
Cool. So now that we've had a look at the necessities, I'm going to cover the non-essential purchases. When it comes to tech and electronics, quality and value for money has seen the largest increases. Compared to previous years, consumers are less likely to care about the clout that a brand or product has or whether it can enhance their reputation. Now that they're so accessible, smartphones and other devices are no longer the status symbols they once were. So if consumers feel like they can get more money shopping outside the big brands, they will. On the other hand, vacations are completely different. People also communicate status through experiences, and so photo opportunities have seen the most increase in importance when making decisions around travel. Because if you didn't post it on Instagram, did it even happen? Beyond making memories, vacationers are also seeking value through the convenience and ease of their journey and transportation being available on the trip. Finally, we can see how attitudes are changing towards makeup and cosmetics in the US, which mirrors patterns that we see in sectors like skincare and dental products. Beyond price, more care about expert reviews and awards that guarantee quality. And just like eco-credentials becoming less influential in the case of energy suppliers, animal testing has slipped off of beauty buyers' radars a bit, which ties into a wider trend we've been covering around environmental and social justice fatigue. And lastly, the desire for products that are fragrance-free or free of plastic microbeads shows how fast the tide can turn for certain ingredients. And that's why it's necessary to stay on top of changing purchase influences.
Great, and thanks for running up there, Matt. The last thing we're going to cover in this section, this webinar, is advertising and messaging. Brands will need to make executive decisions in the months ahead. But first, they need to get a sense of how and how much they should communicate with their audience. Lucky for us, empirical research has already been done on the strategies that help businesses survive a slowdown and prosper when good times return. Harvard Business Review shows that while most companies survive recessions, only 9% are better off after than they were before. And these companies were the ones that mastered the balance between cutting costs to survive in the short term and investing to grow in the future. But sadly, this message doesn't seem to be making it all the way up to the boardroom. We looked at the number of company decision makers saying that better marketing, differentiation against competitors, and innovation are important growth initiatives for the year ahead. And we compared the 2019 figure to those in later years. You can see the results on screen, which basically show the percentage dropping over time, which suggests that companies are generally pulling back instead of maintaining their presence.
Yeah, and based on what we're seeing, it's super important that audience insights are woven into strategy discussions. So businesses are also accounting for what consumers are going through and what they expect when making these big decisions. So onto the last bit now, we're going to have a look at the psychology of price rises so brands know how best to approach them. If you want more proof that consumers don't always think in ways we expect, here it is. We asked them what they wanted a price message to focus on, price rise message to focus on, and information around what they'll actually be paying was the least common answer. More wanted to know when this would happen and the reasons for it. And this ties back to what we've hinted at throughout. People really value a sense of control over the money that they're spending. With this in mind, companies need to give customers a time to process this news and open up a dialogue. 7 in 10 want to be notified of a price increase at least 1 month before it happens, and 4 in 10 want brands to listen to feedback. They ultimately want to be able to plan ahead and make an informed decision. And there's definitely an art to delivering bad news well. While brands should take the optimistic route, they also need to be upfront about things. Consumers don't want any embellishment, they want a concise, value-driven story. And when that's done well, price rise messages can even inspire loyalty.
Awesome. Thanks for sticking with us, guys. I'm just going to leave you all with some key takeaways. First up, the number who say they're spending less is growing. More are feeling the pinch, and as this happens, people are generally becoming more risk-averse and modest. Next, consumer behavior isn't rational. Consumers send mixed signals just like the economy, and many are torn between saying YOLO and scrimping, especially with inflation outpacing their savings. Thirdly, we're reprioritizing our spending, not just cutting it. Experiences and affordable treats are in, as tech and home products become less popular. And there's a reason brands at high ends of the price scale are doing well, alongside budget brands. And that is, it's often about value, not cost. For some industries or brands, affordability needs to be in the limelight. But on the whole, people want quality products, and companies can add value in many ways. Finally, more want to know the when and the why around price rises, which shows that it's not the story itself that matters, it's how you tell it. Over to you, Matt.
Cheers, Shauna. So just before we wrap up here today, we want to briefly introduce you to On the Dot, our new weekly Wednesday newsletter on all things consumer insights. So in this, you'll get wire factor stats to power your week, what's trending in our research, and our topical take on pop culture moments. So that's really worth signing up to if you enjoyed what you saw today. But yeah, that's all from us today. We hope it was helpful. Obviously, if you have any more questions and want to know more, please feel free to get in touch using the email on screen, and we'd be happy to help.